Emily was a pleasant young woman, not much older than my eldest daughter, who was 35. I had met her a couple of times during events at the school where my wife worked. I knew that Emily and my wife were in frequent contact, and without realizing it, I had found myself drawn into the drama surrounding Emily's divorce. From what I understood, her ex-husband was the perfect example of a selfish and insensitive man. He was known for pursuing other women while traveling for work, and when his infidelity was discovered, he refused to take responsibility. Instead, he blamed Emily, accusing her of not meeting his expectations in their relationship. He claimed she wasn't attractive enough, affectionate enough, or active enough in bed, and even blamed her for his own shortcomings when he was home. Why am I telling you this? Well, it's the Friday afternoon before the opening day of deer season, and instead of heading to the cabin with my wife as usual, I'm on my way to pick up Emily. Nearly 12 years ago, my wife and I had the opportunity to purchase 20,000 acres of forest in Missouri, full of oaks and pines, at an excellent price. Since then, we've spent countless hours building a small weekend cabin, carving out ATV trails, and preparing food plot areas for wildlife. Together, we've transformed the property into an excellent spot for deer hunting. This trip used to be a tradition that I shared with my wife. However, this year was different. During dinner a few weeks ago, my wife announced that she wouldn't be joining me for the first weekend of hunting season. She had been selected to attend a series of meetings on educational reform at the state capitol, a place we jokingly call the Big House. While it was an honor for her, it felt like an inconvenience for me. Normally, I would have gone hunting alone, something I'd done plenty of times before, but after a minor cardiac incident earlier this year, my wife was adamant that I shouldn't spend the weekend alone in the woods. Despite my protests, she arranged for Emily to join me on her first hunting trip. Supposedly, Emily knew how to handle a gun, but she'd never had the chance to hunt deer before. Did I mention that all of this coincided with my birthday? My wife wouldn't even be around for that either. Anyway, back to the present. I arrived at Emily's house and gave a quick honk of the horn, something I wouldn't normally do, but had been asked to this time. The front door opened soon after, and light spilled out, framing Emily as she appeared, burdened with an impressive amount of gear. Accepting my role as her guide and teacher for the weekend, I got out of the truck to help her load her things. To call her talkative would be an understatement. She kept up a non-stop stream of chatter throughout the entire hour-long drive to the cabin. Words like cheerful, bubbly, and energetic came to mind as she filled the air with conversation. A stark contrast to the withdrawn, quiet individual my wife had described over the past few months. I couldn't complain, though. I much preferred dealing with her enthusiasm over seeing her despondent, especially since we'd be confined together in a small hunting blind for hours. We arrived at the cabin around 9 p.m., and I immediately got to work turning on the electricity, water, and heat. Although the nighttime temperature was only expected to dip to about 50 degrees Fahrenheit 10 degrees Celsius, it still felt better to wake up in a warm cabin rather than a cold one. I was glad she chose to shower that night instead of the morning. Then I heard her voice, low and unmistakably full of pleasure, echoing faintly through the thin bathroom walls. The realization of what was likely happening made my mind race. What am I thinking? I chastised myself again, trying to concentrate on the movie. After what felt like an eternity, the water finally stopped, and I heard her humming softly again, likely as she dried herself. I found myself completely engrossed, imagining how she might look in there, completely bare. Yes, I am undeniably a very lustful person, which ties closely to my still active libido and the fact that my wife generally shows little interest. It's not entirely her fault. When the organs responsible for producing those hormones are removed, it becomes difficult to feel desire. This is more my issue than hers. We truly care for each other, but the imbalance over the past few years has led to more than a few disagreements. We're still trying to find a way to make it work, and figure out what steps I need to take to inspire her to want intimacy more often. Once a month is frustrating, and now going to bed is more about sleep than sharing any sort of closeness. Much better, she said, opening the door, holding a towel partially across her body as she headed toward the stairs and me. The towel covered her chest, another part was being used to dry her damp hair, and the rest hung over the space between her legs, leaving her sides and back exposed. She stepped onto the stairs, and as she climbed, I tried and failed. not to look at her mostly uncovered figure as she walked away. A part of me almost felt relieved when she reached the top of the stairs and disappeared from my sight. You know, I really appreciate your wife inviting me out here. I think I'm going to have an amazing time, she said, coming back down the stairs, this time dressed in tiny navy blue shorts and a cropped white top that wasn't quite long enough. She stepped off the stairs and walked past me just far enough to sit down on the sofa beside me, holding what appeared to be an empty jar of peanut butter. Tomorrow should be interesting, I said, feeling a bit uncomfortable. You're not usually shy, are you? I could do this somewhere else if it makes you uncomfortable, she said kindly. Huh. Oh no, I'm not really shy, I replied, still unsure what she was referring to. Good, she said while twisting open the jar of peanut butter and setting the lid aside. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she lifted her shirt to reveal her entire left breast. I froze, staring silently as she began to carefully express milk into the jar. Lindsay mentioned that you were always supportive of her breastfeeding all your kids, she said. My husband thought it was disgusting. Yeah, we were, I replied, still fixated on her exposed breast in her hand. Back then it was generally more accepted, but now society seems to be moving in the opposite direction, making breastfeeding more difficult again. The only way I can manage is by pumping milk while I'm at work, she continued. Lindsay said you used to help her with that too, right? Pumping milk? Yeah, I helped her a few times, I admitted. I bet she really appreciated that, Crystal said softly, leaning in slightly to press more milk into the jar. I always believed she would. I wish someone would do that for me. My husband would never do anything like that, she murmured, placing the jar on the sofa between her legs and taking off her crop top, leaving her completely bare from the waist up. Would you? I mean, just this once, could you do that for me? I'd like to know how it feels, she asked. I was stunned. Just express some milk for me. I'm sure Lindsay wouldn't mind. It's just milk, right? I began to object, fairly certain my wife wouldn't approve of me handling another woman's breasts, especially one of her friends. Oh, I'm sure she wouldn't mind, Crystal said, picking up the jar from between her legs and leaning back against me, her left arm resting between the sofa arm and my left leg, her bare back pressing against my stomach. Now you just need to reach over and do my other side, she said softly. Crystal, I started to protest. This really isn't appropriate. Oh, come on, it'll be fine. You're just going to squeeze a little milk from my breast, she replied. She turned her head to look at me. Then she shifted on my lap, turning over to face me, her breasts pressing against my body. She took my hand again, lowering it and pressing my palm flat against her stomach. You know, having you do that kind of turned me on, she said, letting go of my hand and moving hers down to unbutton her shorts. With a soft click, I heard the zipper slowly being pulled down, the little teeth parting as she eased it open. My heart started racing in my chest. Crystal, I began, but she lifted a finger and pressed it against my lips. Don't say anything. I just want to enjoy feeling you hold me. It's been such a long time since anyone touched me the way you've been doing, she said softly. She spoke gently as she took hold of my wrist and guided my hand further down. Lifting one leg, she hooked her foot over the top edge of the sofa, spreading her legs and directing my hand to the center of her body. Crystal. Oh, don't stop now, please. I just want to feel someone else touching me for a change, she begged. This feels so good. I love how tender your fingers are, but how firm your touch can be. Lindsay is so lucky. Yeah, and I'm so doomed, I muttered. Then she moved her hand to the waistband of my sweatpants, tugging them down. We shared an intimate moment together. I stayed there a bit longer, staring blankly at the TV, hardly realizing the movie had ended some time ago. Eventually, I turned off the light and went to bed, pulling on a set of flannel pajamas before slipping under the blankets. Morning came, or rather, the persistent beeping of the alarm forced me to get up and turn it off. I climbed out of bed and headed to the bathroom. After completing my usual morning routine, I returned to the bedroom to get dressed. Only after removing my clothes did I remember I wasn't alone. Quickly, I shut the bedroom and bathroom doors in case she decided to come downstairs before I was ready. Since the forecast predicted a cold morning followed by unusually warm weather later, I chose lightweight thermal underwear, and then put on my usual camouflage hunting attire. Fully dressed, with my boots on, I headed to the kitchen and called up to the loft to wake Emily. Okay, she answered groggily. I heard her footsteps on the stairs and turned to see her coming down, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes as she descended the spiral staircase completely naked. Her breasts, full and heavy with milk, seemed even larger than the night before, moving with every step. She yawned and said, "I'll be ready for breakfast in a minute." She headed to the bathroom without bothering to shut the door. From the kitchen I couldn't see much anyway. I had bacon sizzling in a pan when she came out, still naked. She grabbed a peanut butter jar from the fridge, sat down at the kitchen table, and leaned slightly forward as she began expressing milk from her right breast into the jar. "You could put on some clothes," I said with a slight frown while flipping the bacon. "Don't you like seeing me naked?" she asked without looking up. "I didn't say that." "So you do like it?" "Yeah, okay, but still clothes." "Why?" "I don't wear anything at home after the girls go to bed." "This isn't your home." "Fair enough. If it really bothers you, I can put something on. But there's no point now, breakfast is almost ready. You'll want to dress warmly to go outside. If you go like that, you'll freeze," I added. "I've got plenty of warm clothes," she said, switching to her left breast, which now appeared fuller than the other. I took the bacon off the stove and poured mixed eggs into another pan to scramble them. By the time the eggs were cooked, she had finished. It was almost a relief when she stood up, still naked, and headed upstairs to get dressed. Meanwhile, I went out to the shed and got the ATV ready. "All set?" I asked when she came out of the cabin about 10 minutes later, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. "I think so." "Gun ammo check," she said with a grin. "All set." I climbed onto the ATV, secured my gear, and extended a hand to help her up. She stepped onto the footrest and swung onto the seat behind me, holding her gun and pack with one hand. I took the gun and placed it in the second holder, then started the engine to head to the hunting spot. The location was ideal, a small pond and a sizable food plot. The weather didn't matter since I had built a permanent elevated blind big enough for 2 people, originally intending it for hunting with my granddaughter when she was older. Crystal clung tightly to me for warmth during the chilly ride, which cut through the darkness at about 15 miles per hour. We stopped about 100 yards from the spot to avoid spooking the deer. "We'll walk from here," I said, taking her gun from the holder and handing it to her. "How far?" she asked. "Only about 100 yards. I don't want to scare them off by getting too close with the ATV." "Do they hate the ATV?" "Not exactly. It's not a predator, but mature bucks can smell it and avoid the area." I grabbed my pack, switched off the ATV's headlights, and turned on my red headlamp. The world plunged into darkness for a moment until our eyes adjusted. We followed the path to the food plot, crossed it, and climbed into the blind. It wasn't fancy, just a structure of 2x4s with a wooden floor, metal siding, and a roof. On a morning like this, it could be quite cold, but the small space warmed up quickly from body heat as the sun rose. I designed the blind with dark brown walls and a roof to absorb heat on chilly autumn mornings. Inside, I opened the windows and we settled in to wait. I closed my eyes, not completely asleep but not fully awake either, for about 30 minutes until dawn began to break. The sky shifted from black to deep purple, then to dark blue tinged with orange, and finally to pale blue as sunlight reached the treetops. The conditions were perfect, and the spot had a great reputation. All that was left was to wait for a deer. I hadn't even loaded my rifle since this trip was about teaching Emily. "It's beautiful out here," she whispered. "Yep, now we just need a deer," I replied softly. "This is a great spot. I've taken nearly a dozen deer here. They come for the water at the pond." "Oh," she murmured quietly. We sat in silence for nearly an hour before I noticed the first movement of the day. Everything was completely still, with no wind to rustle the leaves, so the slight motion about 100 yards away immediately caught my attention. "There," I whispered to Emily, pointing at the deer cautiously approaching the food plot. It was a young buck, its antlers thin and spiky compared to those of a mature deer. Younger bucks tend to be less cautious than older ones. Older bucks, if they survive long enough, eventually learn to avoid making mistakes like wandering into an open field during hunting season. How do they know it's hunting season? I can't say for sure, but they always seem to know. Emily raised her rifle carefully, sliding it through the front opening of the blind and aiming toward the clearing where the buck stood. She shifted her position several times, adjusting her stance to line up the shot through her scope. "Wait for him to turn sideways," I advised quietly. See how he's sniffing the air? He's looking for a doe. He thinks he's caught her scent. Predictable, she murmured, staying patient as the buck took his time. A head-on shot might work, but it's not worth ruining a lot of good meat by hitting the stomach, I added. Okay, there he goes. When he turns broadside, aim just behind his shoulder and pull the trigger, I instructed. Got it, she whispered back as the deer slowly pivoted to its right, exposing its side while heading toward the thicker brush near the pond. Anytime now, I whispered, trying to keep her from missing her chance. Click. That was all I heard. No bang, no recoil, no smoke, just a loud click. Emily cursed softly, pulling the rifle back inside and working the lever to chamber around, but by the time she raised the gun to aim again, the buck had disappeared into the thicket, taking her opportunity with it. You didn't load your rifle when we settled in? I asked, doing my best to keep the frustration out of my voice. I thought I did, she replied with a frown. Okay, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe he'll come back. I hope so, she said, setting the rifle down with a sigh. Then after a moment, she added sheepishly, oops. Yeah, I replied, leaning back with another sigh. I wouldn't have taken that deer myself, but for a beginner, any opportunity is a good one. We sat in silence for about 10 minutes, lost in our own thoughts until she stood up, or at least as much as the blind allowed, and started peeling off her jacket. You okay? I asked. I thought you said it was going to be cold. It's hot in here, she replied. It's probably already over 70 degrees Fahrenheit in here with the sun hitting us, but it's not that warm outside, I promise. Well, I'm not sitting out there, she said, dropping her jacket on the floor before unlacing her boots. What are you doing? I whispered. Getting rid of these long johns. I'm roasting, she answered quietly, pulling off one boot and then the other, standing carefully to avoid hitting her head on the metal roof. She unbuttoned her camouflage pants and slid them down her legs before sitting down again. Then she stood up once more and pushed her green thermal underwear over her hips and down her legs. I couldn't help but watch as more of her skin was revealed until she sat beside me completely naked. There we go, she said with a laugh. Co-ed naked hunting. Yeah, I replied, unable to look away. Are you going to join me? She teased. Get undressed, I mean. The deer can't see us in here. And it's not like anyone else will either. What? Get naked? I asked, stunned. It wouldn't be co-ed naked hunting if you didn't, she said with a playful grin. Come on. I hesitated, struggling to process her suggestion. This is extremely inappropriate, I muttered under my breath. Oh, no more inappropriate than you milking me while I lay in your lap, she countered. I'd say that was much worse than us being naked in a deer blind. As I said, I began sighing. You wouldn't want me to tell your wife about that, would you? She added, a mischievous glint in her eyes. You wouldn't, I said. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. Convincing me not to say anything wouldn't be too hard, she said with a smirk. So, if I understand you correctly, if I get naked you won't tell her I was naked with you? I asked, trying to clarify. That's about right, she replied, her grin never fading. I let out a heavy sigh. Fine. I'm already in trouble. What's a little more? That's the spirit, she said cheerfully as I started unlacing my boots. Within minutes, I had removed all my clothes, and Crystal tossed each item out the window, leaving us both naked except for our boots. Now it's truly co-ed naked hunting, she said with a laugh. So it seems, I responded dryly. She stood as much as the cramped space allowed, turned around and sat on my lap, her back pressed against my chest. Swinging one leg over mine, she leaned into me and guided my hands to her breasts. I need to express some milk, and I'd much rather you do it, she said. So all this was just to get me to do that? I asked incredulously. More or less, she admitted with a shrug. As we became more intimate, guilt began to gnaw at me. I was betraying my wife, not once but twice, and enjoying it. What kind of person, what kind of husband did that make me? I knew I needed to confess, but how? And how could I ensure Emily didn't suffer any fallout? I think we should head back, I said suddenly, breaking the silence. Okay, but our clothes are out there, Crystal reminded me, nodding toward the window. You threw them out so you can get them, I said with a weak laugh. But it's cold out there. I'll freeze, she protested. If that's the cost, so be it, I replied firmly. After a few moments, Crystal reluctantly got up and retrieved our clothes. She threw them into the blind through the door before climbing back in, trembling slightly from the lingering cold outside. It wasn't much warmer inside, especially since the door had been left open while she gathered our things. She returned to my lap, curling up against me in search of warmth. Without thinking, I wrapped my arms around her and held her close. We stayed like that for a few minutes, my hand softly stroking her body, until she broke the silence with a playful whisper. "Keep doing that, and you might have to love me again," she teased. "Sorry," I mumbled quickly, pulling my hands back to rest on her waist. "I'm not," she said, grabbing my hands and guiding them back to her chest. I was enjoying it, just saying. It's getting me all worked up again. "You might have to love me again when we get back." "I don't think that's such a great idea. We're already in enough trouble as it is," I replied cautiously. "Maybe, maybe not," she giggled, her tone mischievous. "Come on, I need a shower and so do you. I wonder if we can both fit in that tiny shower stall." "Lindsay and I have," I replied, realizing too late what I had just admitted. "Perfect. Let's go then," she said cheerfully, pulling me up from the bench and leading me toward the shower. I couldn't help but wonder how I had gotten myself into this situation, and what the consequences might be. We got dressed quickly, skipping underwear since it didn't seem necessary given what we had planned. The ride back to the cabin on the ATV was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we arrived, the cozy warmth from the wood stove greeted us as we carried our gear inside. Crystal undressed almost immediately, clearly eager for more, but instead of approaching me, she climbed the spiral stairs to the loft. "Come on, I've got something for you up here," she called out. "Sure," I replied, following her lead. I was still wearing my boots and pants but nothing else. She stood by the bed, a sly smile on her face and her hands hidden behind her back. "Here," she said as I approached, handing me a small blue envelope. "Read it." Turning it over, I saw "to Emilich" written in my wife's familiar handwriting. I opened the envelope and pulled out a birthday card. The front read, "To my sweet, loving husband." Opening it, I read the printed message. "If only I could find a way to express how special and wonderful you are. You are one of a kind, and I will love you forever." Beneath that, my wife had written a personal note. "I have seen too many of our friends' marriages fall apart later in life because of their sex lives. I don't want that to happen to us. You are so good to me in so many ways, and I won't lose you to our differences. I know we will eventually be back together in that way, but until then I need to keep you happy, so for your birthday my gift to you is Crystal. Enjoy her however you wish. You have my blessing. All I ask is that you save your love for me. At the end of the weekend, answer just one question. Did you enjoy my gift? I don't need to know more than that. I love you. Happy birthday." "So last night and today, did you know about this all along?" I asked. "Yes, for weeks now," she admitted with a grin. "So, do you want to take that shower? There are still plenty of hours and ways to make this day interesting." I glanced down at the card again, shaking my head in amazement. "Might as well. Does it come with cake too?" "You'll have to wait and see," she teased, stepping toward me and pressing her soft chest against mine. She leaned in for a long sensual kiss. "Shower," she whispered after finally breaking the kiss. "Might as well," I replied softly, still wondering how I could possibly thank my wife for such an extraordinary gift.